Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to the North Central U.S. Climate and Drought Outlook webinar for October 2024. I'm Dennis Toddy, usually a voice you don't hear until the end, but I'd like to welcome you. Doug Cluck is, we'll jokingly say, on assignment. He's at a meeting in Montana this week, so I've been promoted to be the host. This is our annual double feature for those of you who remember the old drive-ins double features, where we have our usual presenter, Austin Pearson from Purdue University, the Midwestern Regional Climate Center and Illinois State Climate Office will be doing the main presentation. And then we have Brad Rippey from the Office of the Chief Economist, USDA, who will be doing a growing season 2024 review. So a reminder, since we have two folks, this one will run a little bit longer. It'll probably go above the top of the next hour. We invite you to stick around. We will try to get done as quick as we can through this, but it probably will run over a little bit, just so you're aware of that. So please do enter your questions in the questions tab, that is down there. We will try to address them along the way in case you have to leave, and then we will address questions at the end. So thanks for being here with us. Glad to have you with us, and let's turn it over to Austin.
Thank you, Dennis, and happy to be here with you all today, and just honored to get the opportunity to present this month's webinar to you all. Quite a photogenic photo that we have here on the main slide, and got the Northern Lights. Photo credit to Rodney Beatty out of South Dakota, with the picturesque look at the tractor at the dark, allowing me to use this as the slide, title slide for today's presentation. Ample clear skies allowing us to see those northern lights, and then just a perfect geostorm to see that radiation hitting the atmosphere. It's just pretty spectacular to see that. And I've got a picture of the comet, the Atlas comet, that we'll show here towards the end of the presentation here this afternoon. So just quite a lot going on. Most folks be like, well, it's not really doing a whole lot outside, but there's a lot of dryness. There's been a lot of heat. We got a lot to discuss over the coming hours. So today's and past recorded webinars are located on the Midwestern Regional Climate Center website. You can also get it from the High Plains Regional Climate Center website. You will be able to find these in the presentation links and be able to access this at a later time. I did want to draw attention that the next webinar will be on Thursday, November 14th at 1 p.m. Central Time with Kenny Blumenfeld from the Minnesota State Climate Office. Kenny will do a fantastic job for us next month and catch us up on the ongoing drought concerns that we're seeing across the North Central region. We've also got several other agencies that we have that have made this webinar possible, and wanted to make sure that we called each of those out within the slides and direct links to their potential or their actual websites. So some of the things that we're going to talk about today are just the overview of temperatures, the short term and the longer term over the last September, and see how things came out with that. Precipitation and lack of clouds in September, and then what's kind of been happening in October so far. Talk about Helene's impacts on the Midwest. Also a few preliminary storm reports and drought concerns and impacts, hydrological conditions, and finish with the outlook, and then we'll turn it over to Brad for a growing season review. I did want to draw quick attention to the final temperature numbers for each of our states. Because NCEI is located in Asheville, North Carolina, many of you have seen that they were impacted severely by Hurricane Helene, with devastating flooding, washing out of roads and just general infrastructure. We will not have final data from them for a little while longer. So I do know that they are restoring services back for their center. Certain products are accessible, but final numbers should be out here probably within the next month. So keep in mind, the numbers that I am presenting today are preliminary for September. And so looking at that, September 2024, we saw exceptionally warm temperatures across the north central region of the United States, with the northern states experiencing the most significant anomalies. The majority of states in this region recorded one of their top 50 warmest Septembers on record, with North Dakota and Minnesota breaking their all-time records for the month. And so another thing that was really important with this was that the temperature departures were very striking, especially in the Dakotas, Wyoming, and Minnesota, where the average temperatures soared to more than 6 degrees above normal for the month. The unusual high daytime temperatures contributed more significantly to these averages than the nighttime lows. And a lot of the things that we're seeing large temperature swings from daytime to nighttime temperatures. And so that's a lot that can be contributed to the lower humidity values and then also the lack of cloud cover. The warmth was also so remarkable that 53 stations with at least 90 years of data recorded their highest ever September temperatures. These record-breaking stations were primarily concentrated in 8 states over Colorado, Nebraska, Michigan, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. So quite the unprecedented warmth that we saw in September. Now, the exceptional warmth in September 24 was not just about higher temperature values. It was also manifested in the unusual persistence of warm days. So the numerous weather stations across the north central region, particularly those in northern areas, logged an extraordinary number of hot days. So specifically, dozens of stations recorded more than 20 days where the maximum temperatures reached or surpassed 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So, large portion of those month was dominated by high temperatures during the daytime. This prolonged period of warmth was unprecedented for many locations. In fact, it was the frequency of these warm days that set new records at numerous weather stations throughout the region. So this pattern of sustained high temperatures, especially in the northern parts of the area. So this map, you can see that there are several stations that had ranked first for number of days greater than or equal to 80 degrees throughout the month of September. So the other thing with that is that the warmth is actually extended into the first half of October. So as shown in the maps, we're depicting the temperature average departures on the left, and then the maximum temperature departures on the right. And this is for the first 16 days of October. And you can see that most of the region on the average temperatures side experienced above normal temperatures, with Wisconsin, Michigan, and Ohio not getting in on as much as the anomalous departures in the western part of the region. And so warm temperatures continued. The maps also highlight the pronounced departures in the average maximum temperatures, with some areas in the west seeing deviations of up to 16 degrees above typical values. So it was really, really warm in the western part of the region. And so, again, I mentioned about the September temperatures. We have these unusually warm daytime highs for the given time of year, combined with the low lows during the evening times. And so you see these large temperature swings throughout the day, and sometimes more than 35 or 40 degree temperature swings throughout that daytime period. So also, another thing with this is that several states, including Nebraska and Kansas, experienced unusually late 100 degree Fahrenheit days. This is also breaking records by over a week in some cases. And so we've had some 100 degree days in October. And so that's something that is just kind of unprecedented at this time of year. Despite this warmth though, we've had some recent mornings with widespread freezes. This morning being one of those where temperatures fell well below 28 degrees Fahrenheit, which would also be considered a killing freeze. Climatologically speaking, though, when we talk about this occurred about a week later than usual in the northern parts of the region, and right about normal in the central part of the region, and then in the southern extent about a week earlier. And so that's one of the things that that we've been contending with. So many of you probably saw frost and freeze alerts and freeze warnings from your National Weather Service offices over the last 24 hours. Now, moving into the precipitation and lack of clouds, again, keep in mind that these are preliminary totals. And so the region experienced significant dryness, and with precipitation departures exceeding 2 inches below normal in Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. On the other side, and flip of the coin, you look over in Kentucky, they received over 3 inches above normal in rainfall due to remnants of Hurricane Helene. And so, impacts from that were observed, and rain had fallen on incredibly dry ground, especially in Ohio, leading to a bunch of runoff in those spots and localized flooding. We'll also say that Nebraska recorded its driest September on record, while Iowa and Michigan had their second driest September on record. Kentucky experienced its third wettest September on record, so just quite the difference, and really one event impacting that part of the region. Many states reported their top 10 or 5 or 10 driest Septembers ever. Additionally, 52 stations with over 90 years of data observed their driest September, and those were primarily in the plains in the western Midwest. The dryness was marked by extended dry spells, with Nebraska, Iowa, and Illinois and Indiana experiencing more than 15 consecutive days with less than 1/100 of an inch of precipitation. And a couple stations, Redwood Falls and Canby, Minnesota, recorded almost no measurable precipitation throughout the entire month. Now, this has also continued into October for a lot of folks, but first I want to talk about some of the cloud situation that we had over the region. And there really wasn't any, there wasn't much clouds across the northern part of the region. And so the absence of clouds typically results in a lack of precipitation, right? Thank you, Mr. Obvious. But the map and the figure does show the cloudiness rankings across the contiguous US for last month. And it was also based on the ERA5 reanalysis data. And it's important to note that the cloudiness and sunshine are not entirely interchangeable. So the lower 48 states experienced their 11th least cloudy September on record, with Minnesota and Wisconsin likely recording their least cloudy September ever recorded. And again, with that photogenic first slide that we had, it was excellent for viewing the northern lights and also the comet that a lot of folks are being able to see as we saw last night and the last few nights. This record dryness, again, is still extending from September into October. Oftentimes drought begets drought and continues. It's hard to break that. And we're seeing that with a large part of the region, especially west of the Indiana-Illinois border, and even including Indiana. Things are just still remaining dry, and you can see that with these two maps that we have. The left map shows the accumulated precipitation from October 1st through October 16th, and it's revealing that almost no rainfall fell across the plains. While parts of the Midwest received some rain during the first 16 days of October, and most areas saw minimal amounts though. And so the only place that you can see that had an actual above normal percent of mean would be right up against Lake Erie. Everywhere else, and maybe up on the northern extents of the Michigan's UP. So most of the region was below normal on precipitation and just fueling the dry conditions that are already present. And I will note that yesterday, as I was preparing this presentation, we did have, maybe the night before, we had some lake effect banding up in northwestern Indiana, along with some grapple, so ice pellets falling from the sky as a result of some of the deeper convection coming off of Lake Michigan and the colder air. So one of those things that we've been dealing with in Indiana, but really the big event for the month of September was Helene. And, you know, obviously you just need to make a statement that, you know, Eastern Tennessee and Western North Carolina were devastated from this particular event. And, you know, our thoughts are with those affected as they continue to recover. Being a NOAA center, the Midwestern Regional Climate Center, the National Centers for Environmental Information, is located in Asheville, North Carolina. And so ongoing efforts to make sure that they restore services, but it just was devastating, to say the least. Some of those impacts were also felt in Indiana, but again, to a lesser extent, or across the Midwest, but to a lesser extent. So we did see some substantial rainfall totals in Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and Kentucky, with some areas receiving over 5 inches of rain, or more than 400% of the normal rainfall. This did bring some much needed moisture to the drought-stricken regions, as these areas have been kind of in trouble for the last couple months. It's led to significant runoff and localized flooding in Ohio and portions of Kentucky. And so we'll step forward from some additional impacts from Helene. It brought significant wind issues across Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, with wind gusts up to 70 miles an hour in Ohio. 68-mile-per-hour gust was recorded at the Indianapolis International Airport, and several locations with more than 50-mile-an-hour wind gusts in Kentucky. These strong winds caused widespread power outages due to downed trees and flattened agricultural crops such as corn. You can see this photo here from Aaron Wilson in Ohio with some downed corn. Ongoing disease, lack of support in those stalks have caused a lot of that issue with downed corn. So that's ultimately going to be a challenge with folks continuing harvest throughout the fall. Despite the challenges, though, I mean, Helene did bring some temporary benefits, like the superficial greening of lawns and pastures. I had to mow my yard again after taking a few weeks break, and I don't know about you, but in Indiana, I've been just kind of tired of mowing and ready to pack up the mower for the winter. But we did have some green up. Pastures have been affected, so greening up pastures, but this kind of superficial greening, really short-term lived recovery, and most of that has been moved on, and things are drying out again across most of these areas. And so, a lot of the runoff, though, quickly ran off into the Ohio River system and out into the ocean. So a lot of that has already been moved out, and we'll see that in some of the stream flow maps that we'll show here late in a little bit. Some of the storm reports, obviously, due to the record dryness across the region, storm reports were minimal. We did have an EF1 tornado that was reported in St. Louis County, Minnesota. It uprooted many trees along its path. Indiana also experienced a few tornadoes, including an EF0 in Clark County, and you can see that there is some damage there in that middle photo. Additionally, Warner, South Dakota observed a gustnado on September 23rd, 2024. So you can see that in the rightmost image. And that's a gustnado. If you're not sure what that is, it's those short-lived ground-based swirling winds that can come from a leading edge of a thunderstorm outflow boundary. It's kind of like a tornado, but not like tornadoes. Gustnados are not connected to a cloud base, and they're typically weaker in strength. So they can still cause localized damage, but they're not as devastating as what a tornado would be. Some of the drought concerns. This is the big story for the month, minus the Helene events in the southeastern portion of the region. The October 15th U.S. Drought Monitor, released this morning, reveals that there's extensive dry conditions throughout the region. The map indicates varying drought intensities, where severe and extreme drought is prevalent in parts of the high plains in the Midwest. We'll see that over 85% of the region is experiencing abnormally dry conditions or worse, and nearly 60% is classified in being drought. And almost 6% is facing extreme or exceptional drought across the Midwest. So this dry period that we've been experiencing has really exponentially worsened things across the region, and something that is going to continue to happen if we don't get much of any relief in snow or precipitation. This week's Drought Monitor map compared to last week's map, this is a change map, that what we call it. It shows a significant 1 to 2 class degradation in drought conditions across much of the region. And this was driven by the warmer temperatures, low humidity, ample sunshine, and winds, all of which promote the evaporation and dry weather. The localized 1 class improvements in Montana, Kansas, and Missouri were observed, but the more substantial 1 to 3 class improvement we're seeing in southern Illinois, southern Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio due to the impacts of Helene. Out of the years that I've been monitoring and looking at these drought change maps, I don't know that I've ever recalled a time where I've seen a 3-class improvement after a hurricane. And someone could probably correct me and say that this has happened, but just seeing the 3-class improvement in Kentucky was certainly surprising to see. And so keep an eye on that particular region. If we do continue seeing dry conditions moving forward, maybe a whiplash effect as a result. The map also compares, this one compares with the current drought monitor with the April 30th US drought monitor for the region. So this is a 24-week change map. Initially, many areas across the region experienced above normal precipitation this spring, a lot of flooding up in the Dakotas and Minnesota and into Wisconsin. Bridges washed out and stuff like that. Brad may comment on a bit of that here soon. But overall, the conditions have deteriorated as the summer progressed. Eastern Ohio faced its worst drought since the US drought monitor's inception, with maps going back to 2000. The impacts of the ongoing drought are still being assessed as we're pulling in crops, but some improvement has been noted over the past 24 weeks in parts of Montana, North Dakota, North Minnesota, Southern Colorado, Southern Kansas, Missouri, Illinois, and Kentucky. So, kind of a mixed bag, but overall, most of the land area has seen 1 to 4 class and even 5 class degradations across the region. So very dry. We've had some instances where we'd have a flash drought settle in, especially in the eastern side of the region. We would get wet for a little bit and then we dry out again. And so just a lot of back and forth across the summer months. Now, some of the impacts, I will say that, impacts have been felt across the entirety of the region. Every state has had some sort of impact. Several states have implemented burn bans. And so Ohio and Indiana taking particularly stringent measures. At one point, 68 out of 92 counties in Indiana had burn bans. Just kind of highlighting the severity of the situation and creating significant social pressure to comply with that. Another way of saying peer pressure, I felt like some of the counties, like it was just coming in, we could refresh the map every 15 minutes and we'd see a new county pop up with a burn ban. Another thing that we've seen, pawpaws, which are about the size of an avocado and often described as having a flavor profile that combines mango, banana, and pineapple, have been notably impacted. So you can see the pictures of the pawpaws here on the right. They've been undersized this year, and they've been more bitter than typical years. So if you're a fan of pawpaws, I've personally never had one, but would like to try one. But looking at that, reduced quality with that. Interestingly, though, pumpkins have fared better than most states. These are fairly hardy crops that thrive in drier conditions, and as a result, I think pumpkin harvests have remained relatively stable, which is great news for Trent Ford, the Illinois state climatologist, as pumpkin pie is still on the menu for November. So there you go, Trent. Wanted to make sure we got that one in there. Some other impacts. We've had some drought-affected states, again, with the early fall foliage across the region. Some trees, species skipping color changes in general and just shedding their leaves without changing color. Despite these conditions, though, Wisconsin has reported vibrant fall colors. Josh Bendorf provided that information yesterday on the webinar. North Central region has experienced several field fires again, and so you can see remnants of a cornfield in Kankakee County in Illinois from last week. You can see that on the left. We've also got reduced stream flows and some where no water is flowing due to the ongoing drought conditions. So Quetzal Levens provided that picture in the center from the National Weather Service Duluth office. And then soybean harvest is revealing smaller beans with lower moisture content, especially 9 to 11% on moisture, in some cases as low as 6% on moisture. And so that's causing some concerns and people delaying, or not delaying, but harvesting earlier in the day to try to catch when the moisture was higher. The ongoing harvest is also exceptionally dusty. So you can see on the right, this is a photo that I took of in central Indiana, just a lot of bean dust as a result of the dry conditions. Water levels in ponds, streams, and rivers are also noticeably dropping across the region. I do know that some articles are saying that the USDA Farm Service Agency has declared federal emergency in some Ohio and Kentucky counties as a result of the ongoing drought conditions. Let's talk about fires. Looking at North Dakota for this particular one, they had a severe fire condition at the beginning of October due to dry weather and wind gusts of 57 to 75 miles per hour. This downed power lines and sparked fires within the area. You see there's a couple fires that are of note. The Bear Den fire has burned about 25,000 acres near Mandaree and is 85% contained as of the 14th of this month. The Elkhorn fire scorched around 10,000 acres south of Watford City and is 75% contained as of reporting this. The Elkhorn fire has tragically resulted in deaths and forced over 100 people to evacuate their homes. In response, the North Dakota governor has declared a statewide fire emergency as a result. And we got a picture of one of those fires in Arnegard, North Dakota from Saturday, October 5th. And so just certain circumstances causing rapid fire conditions in that area of the country. Looking at Wyoming, they're also grappling with significant wildfires, including elk fire. This has burned about 89,000 acres in Bighorn National Forest. It's the largest fire in the forest's 100-year history so far. As of October 14th, it was 27% contained, so efforts are still going on to contain that fire. Also, the Pack Trail fire has been severe, burning around 77,000, or a little over 77,000 acres in Bridger-Teton National Forest and reaching 62% containment. They've deployed over 1,000 firefighters to combat the fires, with numerous evacuations ordered for safety. And then also in response to the crisis, the governor has issued an emergency transport order to protect livestock. So that's another concern, loss of livestock from that particular state. So looking at the hydrologic conditions, obviously with the drier condition, soil moisture is very hard to find, especially in the top profile of the soil. This map shows the United States dated October 16th, 2024, and this is showing us the soil moisture ranking percentiles. The red and orange areas highlight very low soil moisture, particularly in the western and central parts of the country, and showing severe dryness. The green areas, obviously over in the Carolinas, Georgia, a lot of that is from the Helene impacts from that. So dry conditions could possibly mean some concern about freezing depths moving into the winter time. Drier soil certainly could have deeper freezing depths, and that's certainly something that we're going to have to keep an eye on moving forward into the winter. These maps here depict our stream flow conditions across the U.S. This map was pulled from October 16th. They show below normal stream flows over a 28-day average when compared to historical data. A significant portion of the central U.S. is experiencing moderate to severe hydrologic drought conditions, with some areas facing extreme hydrologic droughts. So these conditions are highlighted by the prevalence of the red and orange areas on the maps, indicating low stream flow and the severe drought impacts. And moving forward, we'll talk about this impact on the lower Mississippi flow contribution and other river impacts. We can see that the graphic here on the left shows the flow contributions of various rivers to the flow at Natchez, Mississippi, and this is measured by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. It details the percentage each river contributes to the total flow, along with their computed flow rates in cubic feet per second. Looking, you'll see a dark red percentage. It indicates the river's current contribution to the flow at Natchez, while the orange percentages represent the historical average flow contribution. So taking all this into consideration and the on-the-ground reports that we're seeing within those regions, The Missouri River Basin is experiencing significant drought, while the Ohio River Basin received temporary relief from Helene. The Helene impacts are diminishing, and stream flows are on their way down as a result. So currently the Missouri and the Tennessee rivers are supporting the lower Mississippi River. The Missouri River is expected to contribute at least 44,000 cubic feet per second to the Mississippi at St. Louis, mainly from reservoir releases at Gavin's Point Dam in Yankton, South Dakota. This is releasing about 33,000 to 34,000 cubic feet per second. However, as we move on through the fall, this flow will decrease as the winter release targets are implemented, reducing the minimum flow to that 12,000 cubic feet per second. Additionally, ongoing dredging has been happening around St. Louis, ensuring safe navigation despite the lower river stages. And then the navigation on the Illinois River has been halted over a 9-mile stretch due to vessel groundings. And so that's something that's showing concern over the short time frame moving forward into the future as well. This graphic here on this slide, water level data for two rivers, the Ohio River at Cairo and the Mississippi River at Memphis. For the Ohio River, the observed water level peaked at 22.74 feet around October 2nd. This would be impacts from Helene, and then you'll see that gradually decreasing, so that's on the left map, to a current level of 9.34 feet, which is at the right at the low threshold for that particular area. The forecast does predict the level remain steady, so you can see that moving forward on the graph in the purple line. But after that, we'll probably continue to drop if we don't get any rain events or anything that comes in. For the Mississippi River, you'll see the water level reached a peak on 6.51 feet on October 2nd, 2024. That has also declined to a level of negative 7.35 feet. The forecast suggests it'll continue to decrease slightly, staying below the low threshold of negative 5 feet. Both graphics indicate that the trend of decreasing water levels following their respective peaks in early October. So that's something that we're still concerned moving forward with, and seeing the outlook can certainly pause for additional concern there as well. For the third consecutive year, Tower Rock, a landmark on the Mississippi River between Missouri and Illinois, is accessible on foot due to exceptionally low water levels. So you can see the picture here in this slide. It's a rare occurrence that allows visitors to reach the rock formation from the Missouri side. This actually hasn't been possible prior to this last 3-year stretch for decades. And so just interesting that we have 3 years in a row with this happening. The Kankakee River in Illinois is also experiencing low flows, raising concerns for power plant operations that rely on river water for cooling. If the conditions continue to worsen, the power plants may need to switch to auxiliary cooling sources or even curtail power production. So certainly not what you want to hear from that. Additionally, the ecological impacts of these low water levels is expected to unfold in a delayed response. There is some worry about sport fishing in the coming years, especially as trout and largemouth bass populations are likely to decline and may take years to recover, while aquatic invertebrates could also face significant challenges. Looking at the Great Lakes, I will say that the surface temperatures of the Great Lakes are currently experiencing a significant warming trends compared to the historic averages. So they're warmer than what they have been over that 1995 to 2023 average. So Lake Erie, you can see, was at 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than the 1995 to 2023 long-term average. And then even more striking are the temperature increases in Lake Michigan and Ontario, both of which are 4.9 degrees Fahrenheit above their normal levels. As far as water levels, the graphics down at the bottom, which were received from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So the Lake Superior water levels are slightly below the long-term average monthly mean, with the notable declining since mid-August. And then in contrast, Lake Erie is slightly above the long-term average monthly mean. The other Great Lakes, including Lake Michigan Huron, Lake St. Clair, and Lake Ontario, are generally tracking close to their mean levels. So another important update about our Great Lakes. Let's jump into the outlook. And so I always like to start my outlooks with the 7-day quantitative precipitation forecasts. And so there is a bit of relief looking for the western side of Kansas and into eastern Colorado. Something that we can see, hopefully we can get some precipitation from that. I know producers that are farming probably don't want that. They want to get things done. But overall, Colorado, western Kansas, southwestern Nebraska expected to receive some relief from precipitation by October 24th. Heaviest totals could range from 1 to 4 inches, but when you look at areas to the east, the north and the east, the anticipated limited chances of precipitation, and then even with that, minimal amounts. So not a lot of relief, at least over the 7 days. Looking at the 8 to 14 day outlook, we do see elevated confidence and above normal temperatures. This is pretty much for the entirety of the region, and with slightly elevated chances for above normal precipitation, with maybe a little bit of higher confidence in the Great Lakes region. So hopefully, some of these areas can begin to get some relief, but don't impact harvest too much. One of the big things that we like to look at for the winter time is looking at the El Nino Southern Oscillation outlook. And so looking at the sea surface temperatures in the equatorial Pacific region, and we're seeing cooling temperatures throughout that region. And so one of the things is that we're expecting is a weak La Nina to develop during the fall of 2024 within the next month or so, and continue through the winter of 2024-25. So the probability of this La Nina condition emerging is about 60 to 70%, particularly as cooler than normal temperatures are starting to form in the equatorial Pacific region. The atmosphere is starting to look like that, but we don't expect it to be as strong as the last few La Nina events that we had. So remember, last year was El Nino, this year is La Nina, and the previous 3 winters to this last year were a triple dip La Nina. Not as strong of events as what we saw in those previous winters. Now, during the anticipated weak La Nina conditions, for this winter, the Midwest and Plain region can expect generally near normal temperatures, with slightly cooler areas in the northwestern portion, particularly in the Dakotas. Precipitation-wise, the Midwest is likely to experience wetter than normal conditions, and there's less certainty with the plains. However, it's important to note that the weak intensity of La Nina may result in less pronounced impacts going into the winter compared to other stronger INSO events. So there could be a lot more variability in weather patterns throughout the winter. And then other factors beyond INSO may influence the weather this winter. Looking at the October wildland fire potential outlook, indicates areas of above normal potential for wildland fires in Wyoming, South Dakota, and parts of the upper Midwest. If the current lack of precipitation persists, this elevated fire risk would likely extend into November, and many of the regions would probably stay within this risk until we get significant rainfall or snowfall within those regions. So something to keep an eye on, at least over the short term, and whatever happens with the longer term and how it all plays out. Looking at the monthly November outlook, we can see the temperature is generally warmer across much of the United States, less certainty in the Pacific Northwest and Northern Great Plains, slightly cooler conditions possible from the Kenai Peninsula to the Alaska Peninsula. I know that it's not, you'll see that on the bottom map, at the bottom of the map. As far as the precipitation outlook, we do see below normal precipitation likely among most of the southern United States. So you'd see that indicated by the brown in the right graph. lower confidence in drier conditions in the southern plains, but the Pacific Northwest could see wetter conditions than normal and equal chances for a large portion of the north central region. Some of the key factors for this forecast would be the developing La Nina conditions, the recent changes in the sea surface temperatures, low sea ice levels in the Arctic, and then various climate models and statistical tools picking up on this outlook. Looking at the seasonal temperature outlook, November, December, January, most of the contiguous U.S. expected to have high above normal temperatures from November 2024 to January 2025. This is more pronounced in the southern plains and the southwest. And then looking at precipitation, the southern parts of the U.S. are likely to be drier than normal, especially in the southwest and southern plains. And then equal chances for most of the region with above normal chances of precipitation in Michigan and the Upper Peninsula. Again, weak La Nina is playing a role with this. Drought considerations, seasonal drought outlook, this would be for October through January 31st of 2025. Persistence is the key for a lot of locations in the north central region, with maybe some improvement to areas off further to the east. And so that's something that that we could see moving forward, and hopefully we do get some improvement moving forward throughout the winter. Here's your winter outlook released hot off the press October 17th, so today. This is for December, January, February. For temperatures, we're looking at warmer than average temperatures favored from the southern tier of the U.S. to the eastern Great Lakes, eastern seaboard, New England, northern Alaska. Below average temperatures for most of the Pacific Northwest, and then extending into Montana and the Dakotas, and then equal chances for the southern portion of the plains. As for precipitation, wetter than average conditions are expected across the Great Lakes and the Pacific Northwest. So that's partly in looking at some of that forecast, the drought improving in the eastern side. So that's something that could play into that, with below normal conditions or below normal precipitation across the southern U.S. So very La Nina-esque forecast for this, and depending, obviously we said that it's not going to be as strong as others in the past, but we'll see how it plays out. Current conditions, just in summary: record-breaking warmth persisting into mid-October. Drought conditions are intensifying, elevated fire risk across most of the Midwest and the plains, declining water levels as a result of the dry conditions. And then looking at the outlooks, warmer than average temperatures expected to continue, variable precipitation and uncertainty due to forecasted weak La Nina, and the persistent drought through winter in the plains, with some expected improvement in the Great Lakes region to the east. I did throw this picture of the rainbow to hopefully spark some optimism, because I was a Debbie Downer during today's webinar, trying to find as much good news as possible, but really just a very precarious time that we're dealing with. I want to thank you all for the time today and allowing me to present. Here's a list of people with the climate sector that you could ask for questions. And then also, I promised that Atlas comment photo. You can see I took that from my front lawn last night, and clear skies and cool temperatures and a freeze this morning as a result. So I will pause there and shift it back over to Dennis and Brad.
Thank you very much, Austin. Appreciate that. Great job. I do want to correct one thing. You had listed on the early slides the next webinar being November 14th. It'll actually be Thursday, November 21st. A small error there. So we got that taken care of.
My apologies. I'll get that fixed.
If that's the only one we caught, that's great. So second part of our double feature is not our horror flick, but it's actually a review of the 2024 growing season from Brad Rippey from the Office of the Chief Economist. Take it away, Brad.
All right, thank you, Dennis. Thank you, Austin. Great job on your first time doing this. and I'll try to take about 15 minutes to go through a quick summary of the 2024 growing season in the north central United States and a little bit more generally as the U.S. as a whole. I will bring the good news. Austin had all the bad news, and I will try to bring the good news. First of all, I'll start off with a couple of pictures. Only October 11th, but look how mature that corn looks way up in Minnesota, and that's a reflection of all that warm, dry weather we've been seeing, not just in the upper Midwest, but throughout the region in recent weeks, really pushing things along. We even had some crop developmental delays up in the upper Midwest for much of the year, but really caught up in recent weeks. Pretty much the same with soybeans, again, here from St. Paul. And I do want to just do a quick summary in my words of the 2024 growing season. Really, most Midwestern crops made the grade in 2024. That is a generalization. There are exceptions to that, which I will touch on in a moment. But moisture began to run out, and that was especially true in the eastern Corn Belt late in the growing season. And that helped to trim yield potential around the edges of our region. But one of the real keys was minimal heat stress during the heart of the 2024 growing season. Highest temperature of the year in Chicago was 99, and that was in late August. And I believe the second highest was 97, and that was way back in mid-June. July had warm weather, but not hot weather, and that was a true key in really keeping crops developing at or ahead of schedule and keeping a minimum on the heat stress. Today's crop varieties and genetics favor dry conditions over heat, so they do better in drought than they do really hot weather. And that was certainly on display this year. However, we did see drought cutting some of the crop yields and prospects in the eastern and western production areas, again, mainly on the edges of this region. When all is said and done, it looks like U.S. soybean yield and production numbers will be an all-time record high for the United States. Corn yield also set a record, but with lower acreage this year, it's only going to be a number 2 year on all-time production behind last year. And another thing that's on the front of a lot of minds of producers of this country, depressed commodity prices remain a concern when it comes to generating income from these crops. Austin had some highlights that I inherited here, and I'm just going to, in the interest of time, boil this down to just a couple of quick things I want to talk about here. It was a warm, mostly warm growing season, but rarely extremely hot, and that certainly favored crops. We did have the drought that was most intense in the east, Ohio Valley into the central Appalachians. We did have Helene late in the growing season across the southeastern corner of this region. Another story back earlier was the big June flooding, especially southeastern and eastern South Dakota, southwestern southern Minnesota, and into northwestern Iowa. And then Austin covered the fires in great detail, which have been all over the place recently, but some of the bigger, more dangerous and deadly fires have been in the west. Back as far back as August, we saw some really bad grazing rangeland fires in Wyoming and Montana that caused a lot of damage to infrastructure like fencing and caused, unfortunately, the death of many, many cattle in that region. I'm going to talk about the economics in just 2 slides here very quickly. Economists made these, not me, so the colors are kind of weird, so I labeled a couple of lines here. What I really want to just bring home here is that for wheat, winter wheat specifically, soybeans and corn on the top and the right, prices have been depressed for some time. So that means the bottom line for selling crops has been not so good in the last year or more. These are reported in marketing years. So that green line, for example, in the upper left with the wheat, that is 2023, goes from June 2023 to June of 2024. You can see wheat prices have been on general decline for the most part over the last year, and around $6 per bushel, which compare that to say 2021 when we're up to 12, 13, even almost $14 a bushel. So that's been a problem trying to sell your crops. Soybeans, no different. The purple line showing the 2023-24 time frame there, and again, general decline, dropping from almost $14 a bushel last September all the way down below 10 more recently. Corn in the lower right, again, very low prices, starting below 5 early, about this time last year, and then down below $4 a bushel more recently. The one difference, or the one exception to that, is cattle prices. They remain way high. You notice that if you're buying your hamburgers, your beef, and you see that the cattle prices are extremely high compared to recent years. That's been true now for 2 consecutive years, 2023 and 24. Also, maybe a little bit of hope in that depressed commodity prices is that the prices paid by farmers have actually gone down from a year ago. This is from the USDA report, Agricultural Prices. Latest data is for August. Actually shows that for the overall prices paid by farmers, down 1.4% from August 2023. So some deflation there, which is good news after some really rough years on inflation. And most notably, feed prices, buying feed down 14% from a year ago. Bucking that a little bit, livestock and poultry kind of going hand in hand with the cattle prices, increasing 6.5%. So if you're restocking your inventory for poultry or livestock, that's up quite a bit from last year. Fertilizer up a little bit, but way down from those lofty prices that farmers were paying a couple of years ago. All right, getting back to the ag side of, or the more of the crop side of things here, just want to start with USDA NAS topsoil moisture, very short to short, most recent chart, valid October 13th. Look at the expansive dryness, not just in the north central US, but really almost nationwide, except this east and southeast at this point. 62% of the country, at least in agricultural areas, reporting topsoil moisture very short to short. That's up 15 percentage points from this time a year ago. We see numbers as high as 93% in Wyoming, 86% in Nebraska. Again, reflecting what Austin said, that topsoil moisture is just depleted after this late summer and autumn dryness and warmth. Now, if you look at that over the last 10 years, that red line that ends there is the current year. And that shows that current number, 62% very short to short. The only other year in the last 10 we have seen higher values for that is 2022, when we peaked at 68% on October 23rd of 2022. Recent years, 21, 20, 22, 23, all pretty high numbers for the mid to late part of the year. And that's reflecting that triple dip La Niña that went on, had a little bit of a break, and we got numbers way down into the mid-teens early this growing season, but boy, the numbers have really come up in the last several weeks. All right, getting into, I'm gonna specifically look at corn, soybeans, and winter wheat. In the interest of time, I will not touch on most of the other crops. This map shows the growing areas. Dark green, 75% of the US production. Light green, 24% of US production. So together, that's 99% of your US corn production. The yellow numbers represent the share by state in the 2022 ag census. So in other words, Iowa accounted for 18% of corn production in 2022. Just explaining that once, you'll see this chart again, so I won't have to do it again. Corn yield pegged at 183, almost 184 bushels per acre. And that would be an all-time record. If we achieve that, that's not a final number. We'll see the final number come out in January. But after about 10 years of flat corn yield, we appear to be finally bumping up a little bit. That trend line for the last 30 years is the gray line. Potential corn yield records for 2024, 6 states in our region, including Illinois, a whopping 222 bushels per acre, and Iowa, 214. Other states potentially setting records, including Nebraska, Wisconsin, Michigan, and South Dakota. If you look at that state by state, hashtags or the pound sign, depending on what generation you're from, shows you those states with that pound sign hashtag beside the state yield number. We are down a little bit in Minnesota, also down a little bit from last year in Indiana, Kentucky, and way down in Ohio, where the drought is most severe. Now, in terms of the harvest progress, wide open weather. So we are seeing very rapid corn harvest progress to this point of the season. Wide open, getting almost half the crop harvested by October 13th. That is 8 points ahead of the 5-year average. Only in the far upper Midwest, where we had slightly delayed development for much of the season, we see slightly later harvest progress, but otherwise it's full steam ahead on this crop. Corn conditions, the last chart of the last report of the year on condition shows almost 2/3 of the crop rated good to excellent, 11 points better than last year at this time. Look at those numbers from the Central Corn Belt. Talked about the records in Illinois and Iowa, both those states reporting more than 3/4 of the crop rated good to excellent in the last report of the season. Compare that with Ohio, just 40% good to excellent, a whopping 47 percentage points for this time a year ago. And if you look at the corn condition index, just kind of a quick and dirty look at how the crop's faring, you typically see that declining condition as the year goes on. This year, we have our best late season corn condition anytime in the last 5 years, ending up a little bit above 2020 and 2021. Same for soybeans. There's your contributions by state, your major and minor production areas. Jumping right into it, it is pegged to be a record, a little over 53 bushels per acre, with 4 of our states potentially setting records this year. Same too, Illinois, Iowa, and then along with Michigan and Missouri, Illinois could reach 67 bushels per acre. And the comparison to last year, now the late dryness did hurt the crop a bit more in the east. We saw that particularly in Indiana and especially Ohio. A lot of reports of very small BB-sized soybeans that aren't even being properly harvested. They're spitting out in the fields, some cases germinating. So we have some fields with nice cover crops of soybeans that probably froze in the last day or two. But other than that, it has been a good year for soybeans. They made it through before it turned too dry. Soybean harvest, because of the fragile nature of soybeans, producers often during times of open weather will go for the soybeans before the corn, which can sit out indefinitely. And so they are going after some of those fragile soybeans where you can have pod shattering during dry times, other issues, or if it does turn wet, you get compromised quality, including sprouting. So they get the soybeans first. Look at that incredible progress from Wisconsin and Michigan. 83% of the soybeans in Wisconsin already harvested. That's almost twice the 5-year average pace. Same thing true in Michigan, 66% harvested. And the soybean condition, a week ago, we got our last report of the season, almost as good as corn, 63% good to excellent, 12 percentage points better than last year, and seeing those best numbers right from the middle of the Corn Belt, 76% good to excellent in Iowa, leading our particular region. Soybean condition index, again, pretty darn close to the best in 5 years, just almost running even with 2020. But it again reflects the good nature of the overall season, despite some drought issues late in the season. I'm going to talk about winter wheat and then finish up with a couple other slides. Winter wheat production stacked across the Great Plains, more minor production areas in the Midwest and up across the northern high plains and Northwest. Kansas being our big state there. Winter wheat has had a troubled most recent several years. We've had a couple of up years, 2016, 2019, but there's been some real problems with drought and other issues in recent years. This was a little bit of an up year, 51.7. This is the crop that was already harvested earlier this year, back in the late spring and summer, early summer. And that crop, we did net all-time records in 3 of our states, Wisconsin, which is really not a major wheat state, along with Missouri and South Dakota. Now, the numbers, kind of interesting here. A lot of states other than Missouri and Wisconsin were down year over year, partly because it was a really good year in 2023 across the lower Midwest. But look at the numbers in South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas in particular, how much better they were than 2023, way up. And you see that record number in South Dakota with the 63 bushels per acre, up 34% from last year. So kind of an interesting year for the winter wheat that's already been harvested. But as we look ahead to the new crop, which is currently being planted, we've got the dryness issues. And this is where dryness is not as favorable as it is for harvest and dry down. We've got a number of states, remember, wide open weather, September and October, and we still see planting progress behind average. You ask, why is that? It's because some producers are simply waiting for moisture to plant. It's just too risky to try to seed it in dust and hope for rain when you don't see any on the horizon. So maybe with the 8 to 14 day forecast, more folks will get out and try to make up some of this deficit here. But a state like Illinois, just 33% planted, 6 points behind the 5-year average. You see the same to some degree in Montana, South Dakota, where there's delays related to dryness more than anything else. And also being reflected is the dryness in the emergence numbers. Even a larger list of states having poor emergence at this point. We desperately need rain for the winter wheat and for cover crops, for emergence and establishment before it gets too cold to have any additional development. The crop goes dormant in the Midwest and the northern plains through the winter, and we will definitely need to improve the moisture profile before we get too deep into the autumn, or this is going to be a bad looking crop. Probably should get our first report on condition in a couple of weeks, and that may reflect some of these problems that we're seeing in the winter wheat belts. Currently, over half of the U.S. winter wheat production area in drought, 52% is the latest number. We got a little improvement in some areas from the hurricanes, other areas stayed dry, so we peaked at 58% in drought a few weeks ago before the hurricanes hit portions of the region. But notice that back during the growing season for this year, for the 2024 crop, we were anywhere from 12 to 30% in drought. Not a perfect season, but it wasn't horrible either. So certainly a lot drier now than it was back during the growing part of the season back in March, April, and May. Other highlights real quick. The general picture here, crop yield for most of these Great Plains crops up from last year. But in a lot of cases, acreage was down. So production in some cases was down, but that was really because of lower acreage, not yield issues. Spring wheat across the north, 52.5 bushels per acre, easily breaking the 2020 record of 48.6. Yield was up 14% from last year. Durum wheat, actually it's very concentrated, mostly in Montana and North Dakota. One of the drier areas of the northern high plains during the season. So they only improved 3% from last year. But we did set a record in North Dakota where it was a little bit better on the moisture profile during the growing season. Sunflowers down a huge amount from last year in production. That was because of a harvested area decline. Yield was actually up 6%, pretty much the same as sorghum. Production was down, the increase was 11% from last year. Sugar beets had a slight decrease in harvested area, but a 6% increase in yield. And then the U.S. as a whole, hay production, this accounts for some of the feed cost declines. We had a 6% increase in production and a 10% increase in hay yield. And again, a lot of that goes back to that favorable growing season until the rains just shut off late in the summer. So pastures are declining now, but for a lot of the year, they were actually looking pretty good, not just in our region, but nationally. I have to throw in a pumpkin picture just to point out that our region has some of the biggest pumpkin producers in the nation, including #1 Illinois, #2 Indiana, #6 Michigan. And it looks like a pretty good year. They can handle the drought. Pumpkin's amazing at pulling available moisture out of the profile. I put up a picture there of some of my pumpkins, and they looked great this year. These are baking pumpkins, so very small, not jack-o'-lantern pumpkins. And then I'll finish up with a couple of pictures from South Dakota. These dry harvest seasons can get perilous with wind-driven fires when it's warm, dry, and windy. And that has certainly been on display, not just in South Dakota, but many states in the recent weeks. And then Doug can't be with us today, but he shared us a picture from Polson, Montana. So I thought I would finish with a picture from Doug from yesterday morning. And that does it for me. Thanks for sticking with us. And I'll turn it back over to Dennis for any questions.
Thank you, Brad. Great job, both of you, and wonderful to get that summary going on. We do have a few questions. Please do enter additional questions if you have them. We can take a few minutes and address them here. We did have a couple questions going back to the drought issues. Brad, you've been a drought monitor author. Maybe you want to touch on, there was a comment about there was the change in drought category from April to October, and it was, well, we're always drier in October than April, so why does that change? Maybe you can explain about how we classify drought into the drought monitor.
Yeah, the one thing to remember with the drought monitor is that no matter what data you're looking at, whether it's soil moisture or precipitation, we put everything into percentiles. So it is categorized by season, and it certainly looks at comparisons to what would be normal. So we do, as you saw from that soil moisture graphic that I showed, and I closed my presentation, so I can't bring it back up. But you do see that normal decline, and that's because you've got a lot of use of moisture by plants, and you have a lot more evaporation, evapotranspiration. So you do see that seasonal decline. So you're going to see lower soil moisture in October than you do in April. But that is reflected in the drought monitor classifications. That doesn't mean you're going to see more drought in October than April. It just means you're comparing it, those percentile rankings get compared to normal statistics.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Let's see. Austin, I don't know if you can bring up the Outlook map again, if I can reassign to you. There was a question about snow predictions over Kansas this year, about what La Nina would mean for more snow, no snow possible in Kansas. Let's see if we can bring that back up.
Yep, I will bring that back up.
Okay, and while he does that, Ben, yeah, the Hurricane Milton in Florida, that's that's outside our region. We'll have to connect you with some folks who can talk about that. But yeah, we don't focus on the Southeast in this webinar. So, all right, go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, so I guess looking at the typical La Nina patterns, I mean, there really isn't a strong signal for warm or wetter or drier conditions within the Kansas region, in the state in general. I guess a lot of it would just have to be the variability of the wet and cool Pacific jet stream, and then the oscillation of the polar jet stream. I haven't really done a lot of research or know much about Kansas snowfall as a result of La Nina. And I don't know if Dennis would have any additional, or Brad would have any additional insight on that.
I did share that the Climate Prediction Center does have a page where they show anomalies, what patterns look like during El Nino, La Nina for precipitation, temperature, and snowfall specific. The outlooks don't say a whole lot for snow in Kansas. There is a hint of maybe a little bit more snow eastern Kansas and less west, but I would assume that it's probably more episodic. Do you have a snowfall event down there or not? So it's really a really tough call down there. So
I would say one of the things for the eastern side, with the storm track and depending on what the Gulf moisture and Gulf temperatures do, could have some influence on the eastern Corn Belt, but not as certain on the western side.
I would agree with that. Okay. Brad, we'll go back to you. We got a question about southern Kansas raising more cotton and asking about cotton production status or price trend. I admittedly don't cover cotton very much, even though it touches on our area basically. I don't know if you have anything you can add onto that.
It might be better if in the interest of time, if you give me contact information, so I don't take up time trying to fumble through that. But I can get some information on that.
Okay, it's Shane Hesting, and we'll try to get that contact information to you. Or Shane, if you caught Brad's email, you can send him a note and ask him that question too. So, and it's Shane Hesting at ks.gov is his email. So, all right.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, we are at 10 after the. Okay, there was one more question about how the Arctic and Antarctic ice affects our situation. Briefly, the Antarctic doesn't have a whole lot of influence over us. The Arctic, the lack of ice probably has part of the influence we're seeing in overall warmer conditions, especially in the cold season, with less with less ice over there, there's less influence on the air passing over it about making it colder. So there's probably an influence on the warmer temperature overall. So there's a longer conversation to be had on that, but I'm not a polar expert. I think we've had a couple people who are polar experts. Aaron Wilson maybe has done some from Ohio. So, okay, Austin, Brad, any last comments? I think we've touched on all the questions here.
I'll just thank you all for attending today, and let us know if you have any questions after.
Yep, I appreciate you all sticking through a long one today. I know these October ones tend to run a little bit long, but thank you so much.
Thank you guys very much. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for attending. The recording will be up very soon, as soon as we can get it done here. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next month.